Yeah.
Do you relocate the chronology of Pontius Pilate to the 10th century?
No, not. I forgot to correct this. Paul and Pilate and Jesus. That's stratigraphically. That's after 700. It's not after one. It's not after one. It's after 700, and stratigraphically, and this latest church development you have seen of the 6th and 10th century, that's a stage reached by Justinian, under Emperor Justinian. That's, I think, the first version of this church you have in the Nia church in Jerusalem, a huge church, more than 100 meters long. It was not found by the Israeli archaeologists until a few decades ago. They could not find it, so it was wiped out in the catastrophe. So the question is maybe the question we can ask here: how, why would people invent a date 1000 A.D., 1000 after Christ? Okay, we didn't touch this. We only know that already in the 11th century, Michael Psellos in Constantinople and others, but very, very few people were working on this sequence as we know it today. Rome in the beginning, Constantinople, Rome means imperial antiquity, 1st to 3rd century, dominated by Rome, 4th to 6th century, dominated by Constantinople, and then 8th to 10th century, dominated by Germanic cities like Aachen. And so this sequence is a very old one, without me being capable to name the individual authors and to give the sequence of development, but it's more or less around 1200. It's complete, and you all understand there were no scientific methods to control it. So my idea is that we have Christians before this catastrophe of 930. We have Christians since 730. So we have Christians for 200 years. And there's one book in the Christian Bible, that's the book of Revelation. And in chapter 20 of Revelation, you have this story that an angel will chain, in the time of Jesus, will chain the devil. And after 1,000 years, he will unchain the devil. And that will be the final battle of Megiddo, of Armageddon. And my assumption, but it's a rough, crude speculation. You cannot have no means to prove that. My assumption is that the decision for a year 1000 AD was a theological decision. That the catastrophe in the 10th century, that was the unchaining of the devil that was mentioned in the book of Revelation. And so the probably written by a Jewish author on the island of Patmos, and basing on the tradition. Again, we don't have many other authors anyway. So in the Bible, so the apocalyptic texts in the Bible, they deal with real catastrophes of the past, like the Exodus catastrophe. And in the time of Christ, these real catastrophes of the past, they were turned into prophecies of something that will happen in the future. And then something happened in the 930s. Big, global, up to the Yucatan. We didn't mention this here.
Yeah, we didn't.
Big, and so I think it was not far-fetched to say, this was the day of the Lord. This was the day that Satan was unchained after 1,000 years, and now we start counting from 1000 AD, though we are only in 1000 AD, some 270, 260 years after Christ. Speculation.
So you believe that Paul's, based on the evidence you have, you believe that Paul, the apostle, wrote his authentic letters in the 8th century?
I have no quarrel with the experts. So there's a debate of if 40% or 50 or 35% of the letters are authentic, and I can imagine that. I'm very sure that the man was real, that the man was traveling, and I tried to prove it by the non-Christian sources that we now do not take into account because they are dated in the 4th century or they're dated in the 8th century, and they are not looked at because people say that date I don't like. If it's 800, if it's 350, I cannot explain anything of these these years to explain Paul. I accept these positions, but I asked the scholars, how do you explain this year 700 or 800 or 350? Where do you learn it from? And then they usually say, I learn it from the textbook. I learn it from a coin catalog. And I said, how do we know that this chronology stands up to scientific scrutiny? Let me point to one problem. Most of the data I'm discussing with, they are dendrochronologists. And I'm dealing with mainstream and with dissident dendrochronologists, brilliant people.
So
I asked them a very simple question. I said, you have a sequence of 2,000 years, let's say from 2000 to 0 back, from a forest. Put the sequence on a piece of paper and put to verify it, to reproduce your result, put me out of the 4,000 Roman cities, put me one, not 100, not 50, not 10, not 5, put me one city that has for the 1,000 years a sequence of tree rings, put them side by side and show me how they match.
So
this was never ever done, and this cannot be done because people try to do it. What they would have to do in a city like Rome, they would have to take beams from imperial antiquity, 1st to 3rd century, then they have to take beams from the 4th to 6th, and then they have to take beams from the 8th to 10th century. But in these centuries, the second part, late antiquity and early Middle Ages, there are no ruins of buildings out of which they can take the beams. So we have never ever reproduced a tree ring sequence from a forest. My assumption is that the decision for a year 1000 AD was a theological decision, that the catastrophe in the 10th century, that was the unchaining of the devil that was mentioned in the book of Revelation. And so the probably written by a Jewish author on the island of Patmos, and basing on the tradition. Again, we don't have many other authors anyway. So in the Bible, so the apocalyptic texts in the Bible, they deal with real catastrophes of the past, like the Exodus catastrophe. And in the time of Christ, these real catastrophes of the past, they were turned into prophecies of something that will happen in the future. And then something happened in the 930s. Big, global, up to the Yucatan. We didn't mention this here.
Yeah, we didn't.
Big, and so I think it was not far-fetched to say, aha, this was the day of the Lord. This was the day that Satan was unchained after 1,000 years, and now we start counting from 1,000 AD, though we are only in 1000 AD, some 270, 260 years after Christ.